So what I do lose sleep at night is when certain locations, certain countries are becoming way too strong in mining, which is why I think most miners, and mostly pleb miners, small miners, they have the obligation to the Bitcoin network to diversify geopolitically, to establish themselves in locations that are not so easily hijackable.
Can you please introduce yourselves?
I'm the CEO of Volcano Energy. We develop renewable energy power plants to use with Bitcoin mining.
I'm the VP of Energy and Mining at Tether, so managing our sites around the globe, be it pure mining or generation and mining.
What are the energy sources that excites you the most to mine Bitcoin? What are the challenges to use them?
Well, I think all kinds of sources of electricity are interesting. Electricity, like once it's electricity, it's really like the same thing. So you cannot know if energy. Some electricity is done from solar, or from wind, or from something else. Having said that, as a miner, you really like stable power. Although Bitcoin mining is flexible and allows you to have an intermittent consumption, at the end of the day, like the perfect kind of power supply for you is a stable power supply. And therefore, if I would need to really like rank the power sources, it would be basically hydro. I think is really nice because it's stable, and then geothermal, also because that has a stable output. And then, of course, you have wind and solar, and that actually creates very interesting use cases and business cases where you can integrate it very interestingly with the grid as well. So you have a demand close to your generation, and then you have a strong grid integration, and then you can basically buy and sell the excess and the deficit.
Yeah, personally, obviously I'm a very big advocate for PV and wind. We develop a lot of it. And as Giv mentioned, there's many ways in which you can integrate it to balance a grid, especially when you're using a flexible load like Bitcoin mining. But personally, my favorite one is geothermal. Maybe because I come from the land of volcanoes, but I do think it's one of the most interesting forms of energy. Extracting heat from the mantle of the earth just seems nice, and make energy with it. It provides base load energy, which is pretty much 100%, which is fantastic to use with mining, and it also gives you a very low levelized cost of electricity, which means that mining is very profitable with it. However, it does come with its challenges. It's very risky, it's very expensive, and it takes a long time to develop. But if you do, you basically strike gold. So I think it's a fantastic form of energy, yeah.
What's happening in the Bitcoin mining hardware business? Why isn't it iterating as quickly as it did in the past?
So I think it all boils down to the law of diminishing returns. We saw very big jumps in efficiency for particularly ASICs or computing power. It became more and more efficient, more and more powerful. But we're getting to the point where it's getting to the physical limit of what's possible. When you pack more transistors into a wafer, then the number of those transistors will become smaller. And currently, we use silicon-based transistors, which have a physical limit of 7 nanometers. But through something called quantum tunneling, you can go a little bit beyond that. But even then, you have a physical limit that is 2 nanometers. Currently, and as far as I know, the best and most efficient ASIC is 3 nanometers. So we're extremely close to that physical limit. After that, we'll have to develop new technologies like quantum computing and whatnot. But hopefully we'll see another big leap in efficiency. But I think, once again, law of diminishing returns, it won't be as we saw before, that you could go from 50 nanometers to 7 nanometers. We'll probably go down to 2 and maybe 1 and something. But after that, it's just physically impossible. So we'll have to find other ways.
Yeah, it's exactly right what Josue said. So we are reaching some kind of physical limits on the number of transistors that we can put close to each other on an ASIC. Having said that, when the ASIC started, I think first their efficiency was around like 150 or so joule per terahash, and then you would have a leap that would go from 150 to 100. So that's like a 30% increase. At the same time, if you look right now, so around 2 years ago, the efficiency was around 25 or 30 joule per terahash. And the current generation, we're already at 15. So that's a 50% jump again. So like a doubling, basically, of the efficiency. So while we are approaching some physical limits, I think the improvements are still big, and they're still economically significant among the players for having some kind of a, you need to have some kind of a strategy in order to decide which miner to choose, how much to pay for the efficiency, because eventually if we approach actually a plateau, then it won't really matter that much, and you can basically just keep the miner for a very long time. But it's still quite important what generation miner you choose, because exactly the increases in efficiency are still kind of significant.
Going back to pools and mining centralization, are there risks? Are there any misconceptions? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think it's a big potential risk, and I think it's something that Bitcoiners should be wary about, because basically, who has the hash rate? The power that the person has or the company has that has the hash rate is like they can decide which transaction goes into a block. That's basically the biggest power that they have. They cannot change consensus rules. They cannot accept invalid transactions, because, as we know, the Bitcoin network is validating all of the transactions. So the power that they get is basically censorship. And I think it's very important for Bitcoin to stay censorship resistant. And if you have too much concentration of hash rate, either within a company or, more importantly, within a political jurisdiction, you can have the risk that a certain political jurisdiction basically wants to do what we have in the fiat world, which is imposing sanctions very often arbitrarily on a counterparty. And then as a miner, you are actually physically bound to that location with your investment. So you're much rather going to censor that transaction than having to move out immediately. So while in the midterm, it might make a decision for that miner to not maybe invest there more, in the medium term, the short term, it can actually have a negative impact. And I think it's actually a big risk. I think it's a very real risk. And I think it's something that miners should be wary about. But it's also something that we at Tether are actually very wary about. And that's exactly why we are investing in jurisdictions that are geopolitically diverse. Because it's going to be more and more difficult for various geopolitical jurisdictions to come to a consensus on a decision to censor transactions, because of just the way the world is and the way that the world is actually, the direction is going, which is more multipolar. We at Tether, it's like being Bitcoiners and having benefited a lot from the network, we see it as our duty as well to invest in geopolitically distributed regions. So we just reduce that risk from the network, that it can be impacted by a political decision.
And Josue, isn't your product Lavapool coming to address the risks Giv just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lavapool is as many others, it's an alternative to centralized pools. However, we're not married to a particular pool. And to be honest, I don't lose sleep at night because of the fact that pools are becoming too large. I mean, they've been large ever since, Bitcoin mining pretty much started to gain a lot of momentum. In the end, as Giv says, they can censor certain transactions. And this is something that we don't want. But in the end, the real power is owned by the miner. So what I do lose sleep at night is when certain locations, certain countries are becoming way too strong in mining, which is why I think most miners, and mostly pleb miners, small miners, they have the obligation to the Bitcoin network to diversify geopolitically, to establish themselves in locations that are not so easily hijackable, like some developed countries that we already know. This is why, as Giv said, we take great pride in wanting to decentralize our mining locations geopolitically, going to countries that are very stable, ensuring that we will always have the capacity to mine. And this doesn't go only in the fact that we spread out our mining locations across the world. But it also goes into the fact that we're trying to own the factors of production that go into our mining. So you're not really the owner of your ASIC just because you paid for it and you worked in connecting it and you have the keys to your hash rate. Really, whoever owns the energy owns the hash rate. So we're trying to develop truly decentralized energy sources that we can use to mine Bitcoin, and that will be able to protect us and mine forever. That's why we're using very stable sources like geothermal that can stand there for 100 years and they can mine Bitcoin for 100 years. And really the only way that someone can take that energy from us is building a long transmission line, hundreds of kilometers, having a huge investment there, or just bombing the Bitcoin mine, But we're trying to make them bulletproof in a way that Bitcoin will always be protected. And yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI and its competition with Bitcoin mining for energy? Do you consider it a risk?
I think one of the beauties of a free market is that if there's a lot of profitability somewhere, more market participants will enter and bring that down. So I think any kind of risk, if you wish, I wouldn't call it a risk, but any kind of imbalance that there is, it's going to be temporary, because if you imagine that AI is giving you a high profit margin, there's going to be more players trying to do that, and the profit margin will come down, and then Bitcoin mining will become interesting again. It's like similar, if you wish, like to mining other chains, right? It was profitable at one point maybe to switch to, I don't know, Bitcoin Cash or something, and then switch back. And at one point, I think now most of the miners don't care. With AI, that might not be the case. So you might arrive to a moment where each miner is going to make a conscious decision what to do with the energy. And I think that's actually quite important. And that's exactly one of the reasons why we are investing so much in generation, because you want to be the owner of the energy, because then you can decide what you're going to do with the power. Maybe even you want to sell to the grid momentarily because the price is high, because that's going to increase your bottom line, and that's going to make you a more competitive miner in the long run. So you might switch to AI, and then you might switch back. And these things are also very much driven by hype, as we know. While in the short term, we're definitely going to see maybe going a swing to one direction, I think eventually it's going to balance itself. And I think, yeah, I mean, if you're a Bitcoin miner, then from the infrastructure side, you do have a lot of what it takes to also run AI infrastructure. But I don't see it as a threat at all. I think there's going to be a lot of uses for energy. And because there is another user of energy means actually that we need to produce more energy so that we can actually satisfy all of these use cases. And again, I think what I really like about the free market is that it's ultimately going to decide where the resources are spent on. So I don't really worry about it, but I think it makes sense if you're a miner, if you're looking into that. I think it's good. It's legitimate.
No, I agree with Giv. I mean, I don't worry about it that much. I think in the short term, it's probably going to be the case that in the short term, a lot of miners are going to be drowned out by the heightened demand that HPCs and AI will create. I mean, as demand increases, the prices will increase in an environment that Bitcoin mining margins are going smaller and smaller. If you increase the price of energy, then a lot of them are going to be drowned out, particularly in developed countries that are using a lot of high-powered computing. However, as Giv said, it's an industry that is very low barrier to entry. I mean, the infrastructure is there. You just have to buy it and pretty much plug it in, and you're essentially a miner. Not a very good miner, but you're a miner. So eventually the market is going to be, it's a perfectly competitive market. So the abnormal profit will be squeezed out, and eventually they'll reach a balance. But truthfully, as a very big advocate and fighter for the search and as an objective of having a Type 1 civilization, I like that there's more demand of energy-intensive industries. I mean, eventually what will happen, sure, in the short term, they'll drown some miners, but eventually, the demand will get so high that supply will not be able to catch up. So companies and countries will have to invest a lot on energy infrastructure. And that will increase the supply of energy in the world, and it will get us closer to a 100% Type 1 civilization. So I think whether some miners are going to see it as a risk in the short term, I think in the long term, it's really a benefit for us all to find those sources, to exploit those sources of energy that we have around the world, all those geothermal, all those hydroelectric plants, wind, solar, even fossil fuels, it's really a way so that we can tap into all that untapped energy in the world.